loaded gun on a starch-white tablecloth speaks louder than any scream. But in the world of organized crime, silence is the deadliest weapon of all. They say if you can't understand the man sitting at the head of the table, you're already dead. In 2024, at New York's most exclusive restaurant, $1 billion of Sicilian power sat in total silence, waiting for a wine that didn't exist. While a terrifying misunderstanding ticked down like a bomb, the only thing standing between a massacre and desert was a college dropout with a tray of dirty martinis, who knew that some words are unspoken. They're buried. This is the story of how a waitress didn't just serve a boss, she saved him. The air inside Lorinari was usually scented with truffle oil and old money, but tonight it smelled like fear. It was 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in Manhattan. The dinner rush was hitting its peak at the city's most pretentious, high-stakes Italian establishment. This wasn't a place where you ordered spaghetti and meatballs. It was a place where senators made deals with hedge fund managers over plates of deconstructed osobo that cost more than a Honda Civic. Camilla Duca adjusted her apron, wiping a smudge of lipstick off a wine glass in the service station. Her feet were throbbing. She was 24, drowning in student loans from an unfinished art history degree, and currently invisible. To the Cleonel of Loroni, she was just a pair of hands delivering sparkling water. Table 4 is a disaster waiting to happen, whispered Rick, the bartender, sliding a tray of Negronis toward her. It looked pale. Messi Laurent is sweating. I've never seen Laurent sweat. Camilla glanced towards the private alcove in the back, the one usually reserved for Hollywood royalty or visiting diplomats. Tonight, the energy radiating from that corner was heavy, dark, and suffocating. 6 men sat at the round table. 5 of them were massive men, with necks as thick as tree trunks, wearing suits that strained at the shoulders, but they weren't the problem. The problem was the man in the center. He was different. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a predator. He was perhaps 35, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him with architectural precision. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing a face that was handsome but brutally cold, like a statue carved from granite. He hadn't touched his bread. He hadn't looked at the menu. He was just staring at MSI Lauren, the general manager, with eyes that looked like dead coals. This was Lorenzo Enzo Valente. The name meant nothing to the food critics, but to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Italian Carabinieri, Enzo Valente was a ghost. He was the rumored new head of the Castelvetrano Syndicate, a faction of the Sicilian Mafia that had supposedly gone legitimate in construction and waste management. Supposedly. I don't understand, Signora, Laurent stammered. The arrogant Frenchman, usually the tyrant of the dining room, was trembling. We have a tableau. The year 2016. It is 98 points. Parker rated it. Enzo Valenti didn't. Blink? He said something. It was low, guttural, and fast. It sounded like Italian, but it wasn't the melodic Italian taught in schools. It was chopped, aggressive, chewing on the vowels and spitting them out. Laurent looked helpless. He turned to the Sumaire, a young man named Polo from Milan. Polo, translate. What does he want? Polo looked terrified. I don't know, MSC. It sounds like dialect, but it's thick. Maybe Neapolitan or Calabrian. Enzo slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. The entire restaurant went silent. The diners at nearby tables, tech CEOs and models froze, forks hovering halfway to their mouths. Enzo spoke again, louder this time. His voice was a weapon. He pointed a finger at Lauren, then at the bottle of expensive BO, and then made a sweeping, dismissive gesture that looked like he was swiping garbage off a ledge. One of the bodyguards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stood up. He reached inside his jacket. He didn't pull a gun. Not yet. But the implication was clear. The threat level in the room spiked from uncomfortable to lethal. He's insulted. The bodyguard grunted in broken English. You bring vinegar? You insult the Dawn. It is a $3,000 bottle. Laurent squeaked, his dignity vanishing. I don't understand. What does he want? Camilla watched from the shadows of the service station, her heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped her tray. She knew that sound. She knew that cadence. It wasn't just Italian. It wasn't Neapolitan. It was Sicilian. Specifically, the deep rural dialect of the Corleones Mountains. The kind of language spoken by shepherds and ghosts in the hills south of Palma. The language her nonna used to scream in when she burned the source. The bodyguard took a step toward Laurent. Laurent backed into a service cart. The tension was a pulled rubber band 1 mm from snapping. If the bodyguard pulled a weapon, the panic would cause a stampede. People would get hurt. Camilla didn't think. She didn't check with her supervisor. She set her tray down on the counter with a clatter. Camilla. No. Rick hissed. Stay out of Italiano. She ignored him. She walked across the plush carpet, the sound of her sensible work shoes, swallowed by the noise of her own pulse. She walked right past the trembling sommelier, past the hyperventilating manager, and stopped directly in front of the table. The bodyguard blocked her path, his chest like a wall. Go away, girl. Camilla didn't look at the bodyguard. She looked past him directly into the dead coal eyes of Enzo Valente. Vosia. Anvaligno. Francisi, she said. Her voice shook slightly. Tensed indeed. She dropped the American accent, her tongue finding the harsh rolling rhythm of her grandmother's village. You don't want the French-style wine. You want the blood of the earth. The old Nero d'Avola, the one that doesn't forget. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before, but it was different. Enzo Valente slowly tilted his head. The aggression didn't leave his face, but the confusion did. He looked at the waitress at her messy bun, her cheap uniform, her defiant chin. He raised a hand, signaling the bodyguard to stand down. Cosichu? Enzo asked softly. Who are you? Camilla swallowed hard. The air around the table felt colder than the rest of the room. She was standing in the eye of a hurricane, and for the first time in his life, Ms. Lohan was looking at her, not as an employee, but as a life raft. Camilla, she answered, keeping to the dialect. It felt strange on her tongue, rusty and ancient, like wearing a dress from the 1920s. My grandmother was from Corleo. She told me that you want to offer a man from the mountains a wine made for the valleys. Enzo stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. His eyes scanned her face, looking for a lie, a wire, or a trap. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was the cessation of hostilities. He turned to Laurent, who was shaking like a leaf, and pointed at Camilla. She stays, Enzo said in perfect unaccented English. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet wrapping a brick. You leave. Everyone leaves. Only air. Laurent didn't need to be told twice. Of course, immediately. Camilla, take care of Major. Ah! He fled, dragging the confused sommelier with him. Now it was just Camilla and the 6 men. The wine, Enzo said, switching back to the dialect. He was testing her. Do you have it? Or are you just talking pretty words to save your boss's skin? Camilla nodded. We have a bottle in the cellar. It's not on the menu. The owner keeps it for himself. A 2001 Nero d'Avola from a small vineyard near Pacino. It's strong. It tastes like blackberries and tar. Enzo leaned back, unbuttoning his suit jacket. Bring it and bring me a clean glass. This one smells like detergent. Camilla rushed to the cellar. Her hands were trembling so badly she almost dropped the key. She found the bottle dusty, forgotten in the owner's private reserve. She grabbed a crystal glass, polishing it frantically with a linen cloth until it sparkled. When she returned, the mood at the table had shifted. The tension remained, but the threat of immediate violence had dissipated. The men were watching her with curiosity. She presented the bottle. She didn't do the fancy sommelier routine. She simply uncorked it, poured a small amount, and waited. Enzo lifted the glass. He swirled the dark, almost black liquid. He inhaled deeply. Took a sip. He closed his eyes. For a second, the mask of the ruthless businessman slipped, revealing a man who was tired, a man who missed a home he could probably never return to. Ben, he murmured. Good. He gestured to the empty chair next to him. Sit. Camilla froze. Sir, I can't. It's against policy. I could get fired. Enzo looked at her. If they fire you, I will buy this building and hire you back as the owner. Sit. Camilla sat. For the next hour, the dynamic of l'orangerie was turned upside down. The other servers watched in shock from the kitchen doorway. As the quiet waitress sat at the head table with the terrified City's most dangerous guests, Enzo didn't flirt. He interrogated. You speak the old tongue, he said, cutting into a steak that Camilla had personally ensured was cooked rare. But you were born here in America. Queens, Camilla said. Atoria. Why did your family leave? My grandfather owed money, Camilla said honestly. Lying to a man like this seemed pointless. He would smell it. He left in the 70s. He never went back. My nonna refused to speak English in the house. She said English was a language for business, but Sicilian was for family. Enzo nodded slowly. Your nonna was a wise woman. What about you? You work here serving arrogant Frenchmen. Is this your dream? No, Camilla said, looking down at the tablecloth. I studied art history. I wanted to be a curator. But life happens. My dad got sick. Medical bills. I dropped out. Money, Enzo said, a cynical edge to his voice. It always comes down to money. It is the only language everyone speaks fluently. He poured wine into a glass. She hesitated. Drink, he commanded softly. It is a sin to drink alone. She took a sip. It was rich, heavy, and delicious. You have a sharp mind, Camilla, Enzo said, his eyes locking onto hers. You raid the room. You saw the danger. You acted. Most people freeze. You didn't. I was scared, she admitted. Fear is good. Fear keeps you alive. It's the lack of fear that gets men killed. He signaled for the check. When the bill came, over $4,000, Enzo didn't look at it. He threw a heavy black American Express card on the tray. As he stood up to leave, the restaurant seemed to exhale. The bodyguards fell into formation around him. Enzo buttoned his jacket, becoming the statue again. He stopped beside Camilla's chair. Hélène Dawn, his mouth close to her ear. She could smell his cologne. Sandalwood, tobacco, and cold air. You saved your manager a trip to the hospital tonight, he whispered. I don't forget favors, and I don't forget faces. I walked out. Camilla sat there, stunned. She looked down at the credit card receipt he had left on the table. In the tip line, he hadn't written a percentage. Camilla looked at the man. He was dangerous. He was a criminal. It was everything her nonna warned her about. But looking at the photos of Leo, she knew she had no choice. The roses would, him. When do I start? She asked. Enzo smiled. This time it reached his eyes. It was a terrifyingly charming smile. Right now, he said. Finish your wine. We have a meeting in Little Italy at midnight. And Camilla, yes. Take off the apron. You don't serve the food anymore. You serve the family. The midnight meeting took place in the back room of a bakery on Grand Street that had been officially closed since 1998. The windows were painted over, and the air inside smelled of stale flour, espresso, and high-grade cigars. Camilla sat. To Enzo's right, she was no longer wearing her polyester uniform. Enzo had sent a stylist to her apartment 2 hours before the meeting. She now wore a black silk blouse, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked ominously on the linoleum floor. She looked like a lawyer or a hitman's wife. She felt like an imposter. Across the table sat Don Salvatore, a man who looked like a kindly grandfather until he saw his hands. They were covered in liver spots and scars resting on the head of a silver cane. He was flanked by 2 nephews, aggressive men in leather jackets, who kept staring at Camilla's throat. Don Salvatore welcomes you, Camilla translated, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. He says the weather has been cold for this time of year. Enzo didn't look at Salvatore. He looked at his fingernails. Tell him I didn't come here to discuss meteorology. Tell him I came for the shipping containers in Newark. Camilla switched to the heavy Calabrian dialect. Salvatore was using a distinct shift from the Sicilian she used with Enzo. Non siamo tempo Salvatore smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. He began to speak, his voice a low rumble. He spoke of family, of tradition, of how the fruit in the containers was fresh, but the customs officers were hungry. Camilla listened, her brain working in overdrive. It wasn't just translation. It was decoding. Fruit meant cocaine. Customs officers meant bribes, but there was something else. Salvatore kept using a specific phrase, l'amico di tu, the friend from the garden. In standard Italian, it sounded innocent, but in the specific dialect of the Espont Mountains, where Salvatore was born, the friend from the garden was an old code for a betrayer, a snake. Camilla froze. She looked at the nephews. They were shifting their weight. One of them had his hand near his belt, not on a holster, but near a small remote trigger on the table. "What did he say?" Enzo asked, his voice low. Camilla leaned in, pretending to pour Enzo a glass of water. Her lips brushed his ear. "He's lying," she whispered. "He keeps referencing a friend in the garden, in his village. That means a trap. He's not selling you the root. He's selling you to the feds. The hungry customs officers aren't looking for bribes. They're waiting outside." Enzo didn't flinch. He didn't look at the door. He didn't look at the nephews. "Are you sure?" he murmured. "I remember my grandfather telling stories about the war in the mountains." She whispered back, "The friend in the garden is who you kill before he bites you." Enzo nodded, a microscopic movement. He stood up abruptly. The chair screeched against the floor. Salvatore's nephews jumped, hands going to their weapons. "My apologies, Don Salvatore," Enzo said in English, his voice booming. "My assistant just reminded me of a pressing engagement. It seems the fruit is too ripe for my taste." Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "You leave now. You insult me. Valente, better to be insulted than incarcerated." Enzo replied, cold as ice. He grabbed Camilla's arm hard and pulled her towards the back exit, not the front door they had entered through. "Move now." As they burst into the alleyway, the front of the bakery exploded with light and noise. Federal agents. Nobody move. The raid. They were already moving down the alley, Enzo shielding Camilla with his body as they sprinted toward a waiting black SUV. They dove into the back seat just as the driver gunned the engine, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. Inside the car, the silence was deafening. Camilla was hyperventilating. She had just been in the middle of a federal sting. Enzo looked at her. The street lights flickered over his face, illuminating the sharp angles of his jaw. He looked at her not as a tool, but with a terrifying intensity. "You were right," he said. "They were going to arrest you," she gasped. "Or kill me?" Salvatore plays both sides. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, his grip possessive. "You have a good ear, Camilla?" "A very good ear. I want to go home," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't do this. I'm an art history major. I serve pasta. I don't run from the FBI." Enzo pulled her closer. The space between them vanished. The smell of danger and sandalwood overwhelmed her. "You aren't a waitress anymore," he said, his thumb grazing her pulse point. "You are the only person in this city I can trust. You are mine now, Camilla. And I take care of what is mine." He didn't kiss her. He did something more intimate. He took the pins out of her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders, claiming her transformation. "Driver," Enzo commanded. "Take us to the penthouse. She's not going back to Etruria tonight." 3 months passed. Camilla Duca had effectively vanished. In her place stood a woman who wore Prada-like armor and spoke 4 dialects of Italian with the precision of a diplomat. She lived in a guest suite in Enzo's sprawling penthouse, overlooking Central Park. Her student loans were paid. Her brother Leo was in a luxury rehab facility in Arizona, fully funded by an anonymous grant. She had everything she had ever worried about losing: security, money, status. But she was a prisoner. The penthouse was a fortress. The elevator required a retinal scan. 2 guards, Marco and Luca, were always at the door. Enzo was a phantom, appearing for dinner, dragging her to high-stakes meetings, and then disappearing into his study to make calls that ended lives. The romance between them was a slow-burning fuse. It was in the way he touched the small of her back as he guided her through crowded ballrooms. It was in the way he watched her eat as if he were starving. But he never crossed the line. He kept a wall of glass between them. Protection, or perhaps fear that if he touched her, he would ruin her. One rainy Tuesday, the glass wall cracked. Enzo returned home early. He was bleeding. Camilla was in the library reading a book on Renaissance architecture when the elevator chimed. Enzo stumbled out, gripping his side. His white shirt was stained with a blooming red flower just above the hip. Enzo. She dropped the book and ran to him. "It's nothing," he grunted, leaning heavily against the wall. A grazing shot. Just a warning from the Russians. "We need a doctor," she panicked, reaching for her phone. "No doctors," he snarled, knocking the phone from her hand. "No hospitals. The police monitor gunshot reports. You do it." "Me? I'm not a nurse. You have hands. You have vodka. You have thread. Fix it." He collapsed onto the leather sofa. Camilla didn't have time to argue. She ran to the bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Her hands shook as she cut away his shirt. The wound was ugly, a deep gash where the bullet had torn through the muscle but missed the bone. Enzo groaned through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is going to hurt," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "Talk to me," he gasped. "Distract me. Speak. Speak." The dialect. Camilla cleaned the wound, pouring alcohol over it. Enzo hissed, his back arching off the sofa. She threaded the needle. "Luda Kumari," she whispered, reciting an old poem her Nona used to say. "Pain is like the sea. Venvamitra. It comes and goes, but the stone remains." She stitched him up. It took 20 minutes of torture for both of them. When she tied the final knot and taped the gas, she was sweating as much as he was. Enzo lay back, pale, but breathing steadily. He looked at her, his eyes hazy with pain and adrenaline. "You possess hands of gold," he whispered in Sicilian. "You're an idiot," she replied in English, wiping blood from her hands with a towel. "You could have died." "For what?" "More concrete. More money. For power," he said, "so that no one can ever tell me what to do again. So that no one can hurt the people I keep." He reached out, grabbing her wrist. He pulled it down. This time there was no resistance. "Camilla," he breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It tasted of blood, whiskey, and desperation. It was a kiss that sealed a pact. She wasn't just his employee anymore. She was his accomplice. She was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. She kissed him back, tangling her fingers in his dark hair, forgetting the danger, forgetting the FBI, forgetting that he was a monster. In that moment, he was just a man who needed her. But the bubble burst the next morning. Camilla went to the local market, one of the few freedoms she was allowed, provided Marco trailed her 10 paces behind. She was buying oranges when a man in a trench coat bumped into her. "Excuse me," she said. "Hello, Camilla," the man said. He didn't move, so looked up. He was in his 40s, with a face that looked like it had been punched too many times. He flashed a badge. "Detective Halle, NYPD, Organized Crime Task Force." Camilla's blood ran cold. She glanced back. Marco was distracted, looking at a girl by the flower stand. "I have nothing to say to you," she whispered, turning to leave. "We know about Arizona," Halle said. Camilla stopped. "Leo Duca. Sunny disposition. Expensive rehab. $50,000 a month paid for by a shell company traced back to Valente Construction." Holloway stepped closer. "We're building a RICO case. Camilla, we have the wiretaps from the bakery. We know you were there. That makes you an accessory to conspiracy. That's 15 years in federal prison." I'm just a translator," she stammered. "And Leo is just a junkie," Halle said, crying. "Here is the deal. You're going to wear a wire. You're going to get Valencia on tape admitting to the murder of the union boss last July. You do that, you and Leo walk away. Witness protection. New names. New names. And if I don't, then we raid the rehab center. We find drugs in Leo's room. We'll make sure they're there. He goes to prison. You go to prison.
And Valente?
Halle smiled. Men like Valente don't leave witnesses. When he's done with you, you'll just be another loose end. He slipped a card into a grocery bag. You have 48 hours. Think about your brother. Camila walked back to the penthouse in a daze. Marco held the door for her, smiling. Good oranges, Senorina. She looked at him. Then, at the penthouse that had become her home. She looked at Enzo, who was waiting for her on the balcony, healed enough to stand, holding 2 glasses of wine. He looked at her with a warmth she had never seen before. I missed you, he said. Camila felt the weight of the detective's card in her bag like a lead brick. She was standing on a trapdoor, and the lever was about to be pulled. The tension in the penthouse was palpable for the next 2 days. Camila barely ate. She jumped every time her phone buzzed. Enzo noticed. He was a man who noticed everything. You are quiet, he said over dinner. Is it Leo? No, she lied. Just a headache. I have a surprise for you, he said. Tonight is the feast of San Gin. We are going to the festival in Little Italy. It is public. It is loud. It is safe. Is it safe? She asked, looking at him with me always. They took the armored limousine. Little Italy was a chaotic sea of red, white, and green lights. The smell of frying Zeppo and sausage peppers filled the air. Thousands of people thronged the streets. For an hour, they pretended to be normal. Enzo bought her a cannoli. They played a rigged carnival game where Enzo intimidated the carny into giving her a giant teddy bear. They walked hand in hand, surrounded by bodyguards who formed a flying wedge through the crowd. But the night wasn't just for fun. It was a summit. They entered El Cortel, a famous restaurant that had been cleared of all other patrons. The back garden was filled with the heads of the 5 families. It was a peace treaty meeting, a gathering to divide the territories of the recently deceased Dons. This was the moment Halle wanted. This was the meeting where they would discuss the murders, the rackets, the concrete. If she was wearing a wire, she could take them all down. She wasn't wearing a wire. She had flushed Hale's card down the toilet. She sat beside Enzo. The air was thick with smoke and testosterone. Across the table sat a man Camila hadn't met before. This was Matteo the Butcher Moretti. He was young, flashy, and hated Enzo. Valenti brings his pet, Moretti sneered, speaking in English. Does she do tricks? Enzo's hand tightened on his wine glass. She speaks better Italian than you, Matteo, and she has more honor. Honor? Moretti laughed. We hear rumors, Enzo. We hear you are going soft. We hear you are clearing debts for junkies in Arizona. Camila froze. How did he know? Enzo's face went blank. Careful. Matteo, I am careful, Moretti said. He switched to a dialect. It wasn't Sicilian. It wasn't Calabrian. It was a strange clipped slang used by the Camorra of Naples. Olupudurma. Capacura Moretti said to his associate on the left, grinning. The wolf sleeps with the sheep. Then he added something else faster, lower. Stachyro. Camila's mind raced. She passed the vowels. She analyzed the syntax. Stack fireworks. A loopy. De wolf. Dies. Tonight, when the fireworks start, the wolf dies. Moretti smiled at Enzo, raising his glass in a toast. 2-piece! Enzo reached for his glass. No. Camila screamed. She slapped the glass out of Enzo's hand. Red wine shattered across the white tablecloth, staining it like blood. The room erupted. Guns were drawn instantly. 10 men stood up, chairs crashing. She's crazy, Moretti shouted. She attacked the Don. He's going to kill you. Camila screamed at Enzo, grabbing his lapels. When the fireworks start, the wine isn't the poison. The timing is, it's an ambush. Enzo looked at her. He looked at Moretti. At that exact moment, the first firework from the festival exploded overhead with a massive boom. Simultaneously, the waiter standing behind Enzo, a man who had been refilling water glasses, dropped a picture and pulled a suppressed pistol from his waistband. The noise of the firework masked the sound of the slide racking. But Enzo was already moving. He had trusted Camilla's translation. He shoved the table forward, pinning Moretti against the wall. He spun, grabbing the waiter's wrist just as the gun fired. Foot. The bullet meant for Enzo's brain shattered a mirror behind him. Chaos ensued. Enzo's bodyguards opened fire. The garden turned into a war zone. Get down. Enzo roared, throwing Camilla to the floor and covering her. Debris rained down on them. We have to go. Marco yelled, firing back at Moretti's men. Enzo dragged Camilla up. They sprinted through the kitchen, dodging cooks and flying plates. They burst out into the crowded street of the festival. The crowd was cheering at the fireworks, completely unaware that a massacre was happening 50 feet away. Well, we can't use the car, Enzo shouted over the noise of the explosions. They'll have the street blocked. We need to disappear. Where? Camilla cried. They know where you live. Enzo looked at her. He was breathless, his suit torn, his eyes wild. Not my place. Yours. My apartment. Vittoria. Nobody knows you exist anymore. It's the last place they will look. They ran into the subway station, blending into the crowd of tourists leaving the festival. The boss of the Sicilian Mafia and his translator huddled together on the end train, fleeing for their lives. As the train rattled under the East River, Enzo looked at Camilla. He didn't say thank you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. It's done, he said into the phone. Moretti turned. Burn it all down. Start with his warehouses. He hung up and looked at Camilla. You saved me again, he said softly. You cleared my brother's debt, she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder, exhausted. We're even— No, Enzo said, his voice dark. We are not even. We are just getting started. But Camilla knew something Enzo didn't. As the train pulled into Queens, she saw a man in a beige coat standing at the far end of the car reading a newspaper. It was Detective Holloway, and he was smiling. The end train screeched, metal grinding against metal, the lights flickering in epileptic rhythms. The car rocked violently. To the tourists, it was just the subway. To Camilla, it was a steel coffin moving at 40 miles per hour. Detective Holloway stood at the end of the car. Not here. Not with civilians watching. He simply stared, a predatory smirk plastered on his face, holding a folded newspaper that concealed his right hand. Enzo saw him. The recognition was instant. A chemical shift in the air. Enzo's hand went to his waistband, but he stopped. He was wounded, bleeding sluggishly through his dress shirt, and he had no weapon. He had left his gun on the floor of the restaurant garden. He's here, Enzo whispered, his lips barely moving. Don't look. I saw him, Camilla breathed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What do we do? At the next stop, Queensboro Plaza. The doors open on both sides, Enzo murmured. When they open, I go left. You go right. You run. You don't look back. You disappear. No, Camilla said, gripping his arm. The silk of his ruined suit was damp with sweat. He's not alone. Look at the man by the sliding doors and the one pretending to sleep near the conductor. They're boxing us in. Enzo scanned the car. She was right. It was a kill box. Halle hadn't come to arrest them. He had come to hurt them. Smart girl, Enzo said, a grim smile touching his lips. Then we don't wait for the station. Enzo stood up. He reached up to the red emergency handle labeled, Do not pull. Hold on, he commanded. He yanked the handle down with all his strength. The brakes engaged with a deafening scream. The train didn't just stop. It shuddered as if it had hit a wall. Passengers were thrown forward. Tourists screamed. Luggage flew across the car. In the chaos, the lights died completely. Go! Enzo roared. He didn't go for the doors. He kicked out the window of the conductor's cab at the end of the car, shattering the glass. He grabbed Camilla by the waist and hoisted her through the jagged opening out onto the narrow, terrifying catwalk of the subway tunnel. They hit the cold concrete hard. The tunnel was pitch black, smelling of ozone, garbage, and ancient dust. To their left, the electrified third rail hummed with lethal voltage. "Move!" Enzo grunted, dragging her up. They ran. They ran through the darkness, guided only by the distant lights of the station ahead and the adrenaline flooding their veins. Behind them, they heard shouts. A flashlight beam sliced through the dark, missing them by inches. "Stop." Hale's voice echoed off the tunnel walls, distorted and demonic. "You can't outrun the NYPD, Valenti." "He's not." "NYPD tonight," Enzo rasped, limping heavily. "He's freelance." They reached an emergency maintenance ladder leading up to a street grate. Enzo shoved Camila up first. She pushed the heavy iron grate aside, gasping as the cool night air of Queens hit her face. They scrambled out into an alleyway in Long Island City, miles from the safety of her apartment, but out of the trap. "My leg," Enzo groaned, collapsing against a dumpster. The run had torn his stitches open. The side of his shirt was soaked black. "We need a car," Camila said, frantic. "We need to get to Atoria." "No." Enzo wheezed. "Atoria is burned. They know you. They know your address." "Then where?" Enzo looked at her, his eyes glazing over. "The only place where the wolves won't go." Ipa set out the sanctuary. Camila didn't call an ambulance. She didn't call a taxi. She stole. She found a delivery van idling outside a bodega, the driver inside buying cigarettes. She helped Enzo into the passenger seat, jumped behind the wheel, and drove. She drove with the cold precision Enzo had taught her. She didn't go to it. She drove deep into the boroughs, past the gentrified neighborhoods, into the forgotten industrial zones of the Bronx. She drove to a place she hadn't visited in 10 years, the Church of San McCool. It was a crumbling brick church where her grandfather had been a deacon. The priest, Father Thomas, was 90 years old and half blind, but he owed the Duca family a debt that spanned 3 generations. She pounded on the rectory door at 2:00 a.m. When Father Thomas opened it, confusing them for ghosts, Camila spoke in the dialect. "Padre, au sanguama, you sangu." "Father, we need sanctuary. Blood calls to blood." They hid Enzo in the cellar on a cot usually reserved for the homeless. For 3 days, the world outside burned. The news reported a gangland shootout in Little Italy and a manhunt for Enzo Valente. The FBI froze his assets. The Valente crime family was in chaos, with captains fighting for the throne, assuming the boss was dead. Camila became his nurse. Again, she fed him soup made from the priest's meager pantry. She changed his bandages. She slept on a chair beside him, holding his hand. In the silence of the cellar, stripped of his suits, his money, and his power, Enzo Valente changed. The armor fell away. "Why?" he asked on the 3rd night. The fever had broken. He was sitting up, weak, but lucid. "You could have left me in the tunnel. You could have made a deal with Harley." "I don't make deals with traitors," Camila said, peeling an apple with a paring knife. "I ruined your life," Enzo said quietly. "You were an art student. Now you are a fugitive driving a stolen van." "My life was boring," she said, handing him a slice of apple. "I was invisible. You saw me." Enzo looked at her. The basement light cast long shadows across his face. "I didn't just see you, Camila. I heard you. You are the only one who speaks the truth to me." He reached into his pocket, the only thing he had saved from the suit. It was a small, heavy signate ring, the crest of the Castelvetrano clan. "If I die," he said, pressing it into her palm, "you take this to my cousin and he will protect you. He will give you a new life. You aren't going to die," she said, closing his fingers over the ring, "because we are going to take it back." "Take what back?" "Everything. The Resurrector." On the 5th day, Camila made a phone call. She didn't call Enzo's lieutenants. They were likely compromised. She called the number on the back of the business card Matteo Moretti had thrown on the table, the number of the rival boss. She set a meeting, not in a dark alley, but in the most public place imaginable. Grand Central Terminal under the clock at rush hour. Enzo was against it. It's suicide, he argued, trying to stand up. No, Camilla said, fixing his tie, a cheap one she had bought at a thrift store. It's politics. You taught me to read the room. Now, let me speak. They arrived at Grand Central at 5:00 p.m. The station was a hive of commuters. Standing under the golden clock was Matteo Moretti, looking smug, flanked by 4 bodyguards and Detective Halle. Enzo walked up to him. He looked battered. He was limping, but he wore his injuries like medals. The crowd potted around them, sensing the violence radiating from the 2 men. You're alive, Moretti laughed. I'm disappointed. I was planning your funeral. I picked out lovely flowers. You missed, Enzo said dryly. I won't miss this time, Halle whispered, his hand drifting to his holster. Detective, Camilla's voice cut through the noise. She stepped out from behind Enzo. She looked small, harmless. Before you shoot, you should know what I sent to the district attorney this morning. Halle froze. You're bluffing. Am I? Camilla switched to English loud and clear. I have the ledger, the one from the Newark shipping containers, the one that lists the badge numbers of every cop on the Moretti payroll. Moretti's eyes narrowed. She's lying. Kill them. Wait, Halle said, panic flickering in his eyes. I didn't just send it to the DA, Camilla continued, her voice gaining strength. I sent a copy to the commission. The word hung in the air. The commission, the governing body of the 5 families, the old guard who despised unnecessary noise and hated rats even more. Camilla turned her gaze to Moretti's bodyguards. She recognized them. They weren't Neapolitan like Moretti. They were old-school Sicilians, hired muscle. She spoke to them in the dialect. Gardilu, she said, pointing at Moretti. Look at him. He stands with a policeman. He breaks the omer. He invites the law into our house. Since when do men of honor take orders from a cop? The bodyguards shifted. They looked at Moretti. Tenatolai. The cultural taboo of a boss working openly with a police detective was a stain that couldn't be washed away. She's witching you, Moretti screamed. Shut up. He calls me a witch because I speak the truth, Camilla said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The fish stinks from the head. The lead bodyguard, a giant man with a scar, looked at Moretti. He saw the fear in the boss's eyes. He saw the partnership with Halle. The bodyguard took a step back. He folded his arms. We do not serve rats. The bodyguard grunted in Italian. Moretti's face went white. He was alone. Whole Moretti screamed. Do something. Halle pulled his gun, but Enzo was faster. Despite his wound, he lunged. He didn't use a fist. He used a fountain pen, a Mont Blanc he had taken from his pocket. He drove it into Hale's shoulder, hitting the nerve cluster. Halle screamed and dropped the gun. Enzo kicked the weapon away. He stood over the detective and the rival boss. It's over, Matteo, Enzo said. The commission will decide your fate, but I suspect your retirement will be permanent. He turned to Camilla. He didn't care about the hundreds of commuters watching or the sirens wailing in the distance. As the real police finally arrived to clean up the mess, he took her face in his hands. You, he whispered. You are the boss now. No, she smiled, leaning into his touch. I'm just the translator. 6 months later, the restaurant laundry was closed for a private event. The table in the back was set for 2. A bottle of 2001 Nero d'Avola sat breathing on the white cloth. Camilla sat at the head of the table. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen. Enzo sat to her right. He was fully healed, though he walked with a slight limp, a reminder of the night the wolf almost died. The waiter approached, a nervous young man who was shaking as he held the wine list. Signor! Signora! He stammered. We have the Chianti. Enzo looked at the boy. He looked at the fear in his eyes. Enzo smiled. It was a genuine smile. Relax, Kid Enzo said. We don't bite unless the wine is seeked. Camilla laughed. She reached out and covered Enzo's hand with hers. Her brother Lau was clean and running a legitimate bakery in Jersey. Her student loans were a memory. and she was no longer invisible. She was the consigliere, the voice that whispered in the ear of the king. "To the language of ghosts," Enzo toasted, raising his glass. "To the friends in the garden," Camilla replied, clinking her glass against his. They drank. The wine tasted of blackberries, tar, and survival. Outside, the city of New York moved on, oblivious to the monsters and monarchs dining in their midst. But inside, everything was understood. No words were needed in a world where silence is golden and words can be lethal. Camilla Duca proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's understanding. She didn't just translate a language. She translated the soul of a man who had forgotten he had won. From the humble tables of a Manhattan restaurant to the terrifying tunnels of the subway, her journey teaches us that power isn't about who shouts the loudest, but who knows what is truly being said. Enzo Valenti was the boss, but Camilla became the architect of their survival. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? If you enjoyed this tale of mafia suspense, forbidden romance, and the power of language, please like this video. It helps us tell more stories like this. Share it with a friend who loves a good twist. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter of our audio dramas. What do you think happened to Detective Hale? Let me know in the comments below.